Hey everyone, welcome back to No Talking Points, iPolitics signature weekly podcast. I'm Mark Vigliotti, the editor-in-chief of iPolitics, and I'm joined, as always, by our publisher, Brian Storseth. And today we have two fantastic guests, Dufour, our major projects reporter, and Erin Morrison of Texture Communications. We have a very, very, very busy show because every week in Canadian politics, it seems to be zanier than the last. So I will cut with my witty remarks and get right to the meat of the matter. Let's start off with the elephant to the south of us, Donald Trump, once again, rearing his head into some domestic issues here in Canada, taking some shots at the PM. His Treasury Secretary implied that Mark Carney walked back his comments in Davos in a call with the president. Mark Carney said that's not what transpired. It's a bit of a confusing mess, but once again, Donald Trump brought up, the governor diss that he's been using. Erin, I know we've read this script, we've seen it play out so many times. Does it continue to have that kind of traction with voters, or is there a level of fatigue at any stake here that once again this guy is saying almost, the same comments over and over and over again?
I think for most voters, there's a level of frustration that, we're almost a year since Mark Carney has become prime minister, and he made promises about the deals he was going to get, about elbows up, about building Canada's economy, about partnerships with other nations. These all sound like great answers, and for the most part, he hasn't done those things. And so I think there's a sense of fatigue among voters that, like, why don't we have a deal with the U.S.? Why are we nowhere on the CUSMA negotiations? Why don't we have stronger deals with European partners at this point? A feeling that, like, we're sort of stuck on Groundhog Day. We make no progress. Donald Trump calls us the 51st state. He calls our prime minister the governor, and repeat every couple of months.
Yeah, Brian, Erin makes a good point. It's just, over and over and over again, the same script, but we understand, and I don't want to be overly simplistic here, but we do know that this is a winning issue for the Liberals. Is there, any kind of risk for anyone involved here that, like, the fact that Trump keeps going to this well, like, are Canadians going to tune this out, and is it going to, maybe make the Liberals and Mark Carney's messaging on this a bit less, impactful?
I think it's too big of an issue to tune out. I mean, you see it with Greenland, like everybody's on a knife's edge. NATO allies are on a knife's edge. You see it with Venezuela. You see it with his remarks about Canada. I think Trump knows how to attract media attention too well to tune this out. I think that I agree with Erin, though. At the end of the day, I would say two things. I would say, one, it's not just the last year of Liberal promises and commitments and inaction. It's kind of a pattern. But also, this is a double-edged sword. Like, you see the prime minister's popularity go up because, not surprisingly, Canadians want somebody to take an edgy tone with Donald Trump. But at the same time, it has a very real potential impact on jobs and safety and security of Canadians, and not in a positive way. It's really Carney has to choose whether or not he's going to do the right thing for Canadians or the right thing for his public image with Canadians. And it's a tough spot to be, but you can see it in polling. The minute he starts taking shots at Trump or starts pushing back on Trump, Canadians certainly seem to like it. I was actually surprised to see in what I thought was a fairly good speech from Pierre, that he didn't really address the Trump issue or the U.S. issue in a more direct way. It's just such an easy win with Canadians at this point.
So, sorry, just to go back to you, Erin, what did you make of that, though? The fact that Pierre didn't touch about it. And I know you're saying, this strength for Carney could turn into weakness the further we go without a deal, the more and more we see, issues that I think the Liberals would take offense to calling it, walkbacks, but definitely taking a bit more of a softer and diplomatic posturing in the election when it comes to Trump. Like, do you think that there might be an opening for the opposition parties here the longer this thing drags on?
Not for Pierre Poilievre. I mean, you're absolutely right that Canadians are seeing things like canceling the digital service tax because Trump told us to as weakness. Now, they're not yet fed up with Carney. They're just a little frustrated. They're a little frustrated that we don't have a deal, that we don't have progress, that we just keep living this same reality again and again. Poilievre has an issue. He has not been able to show Canadians how he would deal with Donald Trump if he were the prime minister, what he would do differently. I thought his speech at his own convention just a couple days ago was glaring in the fact that it didn't address Trump at all. Like, he didn't talk about Trump. He didn't talk about the United States. He really didn't talk about trade. That is because that was well designed, because it is a weakness for him. What we know coming out of the last federal election is that folks worry that Poilievre might cave to Trump, that he might be the guy who just kind of supports Trump, agrees with Trump, maybe even kowtows to Trump. And that is a real concern for Poilievre. So is there an opportunity for a opposition party to turn this into a bit of a strength, to say, Mr. Carney, elbows up. You promised us elbows up and we need to see it. What are you doing? That is, there's an opening for that. But can Poilievre do it? I think likely not. Will Poilievre do it? It seems certainly not.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair statement to make, considering he did have a golden opportunity at the convention. I don't know if you were, listening to that convention speech that Poilievre delivered. To Erin's point, it was kind of the thing that was missing out of everything. Considering that, it did seem to win some broad support in terms of the direction, in terms of him trying to talk about hope and try to kind of center himself away from this more kind of negative, aggressive approach. Do you think if you can do that without touching Donald Trump? Because it seems like that was the one big thing everyone pointed to, that on the election campaign, you needed to make that quote unquote pivot on that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine line for Poilievre, given that some parts of his base maybe are not as threatened by the US as some other people in Canada. So it's hard to find that balance. But to Brian's point, though, it is an easy way to get political points. And we've seen that with Carney posturing himself as, the person to deal with Trump. And I think we paid close attention to the conversation that he had with President Trump last week, because of these competing versions of what went down, what transpired during that conversation. We never got a readout of the call, and we won't. So we won't really know if Prime Minister Mark Carney walked back some of the comments that he made at Davos. But, he was asked, what do you make of President Trump calling you governor? And I think people are paying close attention to that because it's a provocation. It's a subtle threat in a way. And his answer of, I'm not going to comment on every little thing was interesting. Saying nothing is saying something, especially when there's so much room for making a joke. I mean, Prime Minister Mark Carney was governor. He could have used that moment to educate. I'm no longer governor, or something like that.
I think I makes a bunch of good points, but Brian, I'd love to get your take on that. Does Pierre Poilievre run the risk of alienating his own supporters by criticizing Donald Trump? Like we saw, this Alberta separatist movement kind of dominate the headlines last week. I know the leadership convention is over and theoretically doesn't have to necessarily worry about that kind of threat, but at the same time, can he run the risk of taking some pot shots at Trump?
Well, listen, I don't think you can conflate the two different movements, although there's certainly overlap between the Alberta separatist movement and the MAGA movement in Canada, but there's MAGA movement throughout Canada for sure. I think it's an opportunity for Pierre. I don't think those people are going anywhere. They're so angry and upset with the status quo of the Liberals that I think it's imperative that he actually does have a little bit of separation there. I mean, at the end of the day, you win elections when you're the opposition leader by getting your votes out and not focusing on giant pivots all the time. But I think this is an easy one. I think more than Donald Trump, which Erin's right, there is a weakness there for the Conservative Party as a whole with overlapping base. I actually think it's the Alberta separatism piece that is not only an opportunity for the Conservatives, but actually I think it's an imperative. They are the ones in the best position to explain to their voter base why this is a mistake, why this is wrong-headed. And even though, there may be some real gripes that Alberta and Saskatchewan have when it comes to Confederation, just like every province has had over time, 100% Alberta inside of Canada is the only direction that is positive for both Albertans and Canadians. So I think that's the real opportunity for Pierre to look like Captain Canada and pull the country together is by taking more of a stance and a stronger stance on the Alberta separatism piece. He is an Alberta Conservative MP at this point.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I don't want to belabor the point, but I did want to, pick up on something Aya said about the fact that Carney didn't really respond to the Trump comment. Is that a smart move? Like, I hate to, speak about the lengths the internet has rotted my brain, but a part of me, when he said that comment, just thought of that Chad meme where it's just like, look how cool I am. He just totally does not care about what the whiny other character is thinking. And I do wonder if there's a bit of an audience in Canada for that, to think, yeah, Donald Trump's going to act a bit like a petulant child. Like maybe we shouldn't respond. Like, do you think that there's any openings there, Erin?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that we sort of, as Canadians, have like maybe a little angel and a little devil on our shoulders. On one hand, when you hear the Prime Minister say, I'm not going to react to every single thing that man says, part of us goes, yes, that's smart. That's good. It's also kind of satisfying. We want to ignore him. We want to not be ruled by his moods, by Donald Trump's whims. On the other hand, he's the Prime Minister. Our economy is in trouble. Our international trade relationships are at a critical inflection point. And him saying, like, none of your business. I have a phone call with Trump. I'm not going to give you a readout. I'm not going to tell you the content of that call. He's being a jerk. I'm just going to ignore it and move on and do something else. It's very unsatisfying when Canadians have real and legitimate concerns about our economy, the job market, and international trade, to basically be told, take a hike, none of your business. Let me deal with it. Like finance dad is here and it's not your business to worry about the economy. I'm sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, it is our business.
Yeah, no, totally fair. And just to kind of shift gears a bit, we had the premiers in town just last week. One of those, I guess, kind of friction points that we were anticipating going into those meetings was between Mark Carney and Doug Ford. We were talking about a rift in the bromance there, and it looked like from their little pizza summit that they had to patch things up. But there was definitely topic number one. And I asked the premier himself, like, you said you're going to let Mark Carney kind of take the lead on these issues. So are you going to kind of shut up once in a while? Because it seems like you kind of sunk the first deal we had with those ads. And he said, no, he's going to keep, talking and voicing his issues, which he certainly has every right to. You were there with me at that press conference. What do you make of the fact that the premier at one hand is saying, Mark Carney, take the lead here, but I'm not going to stop, shouting from the bleachers when I see something I don't like?
Yeah. The province and the premiers have to do their job. They have to advocate for their constituents, and they have to work with Mark Carney when it serves them and their constituents. And that was on full display last week. I would be curious, Marco, because I know that you were looking for, they're presenting this united front. How much of a front is it really? Because we know there are cracks. Were you convinced that they were united last week, or did you think that was just messaging?
I honestly think that Doug Ford got pulled into a corner by Mark Carney and said, don't worry, bud, we're working on this. We're going to address some of those concerns. Those ways that they're going to address them, I think we're all kind of, how can I say this with being diplomatic? I think we're being misled. The fact is, without a U.S. deal in place on auto tariffs, Erin, you would know better than I would. Like, are we really going to get a Hyundai? Are we really going to get a BYD to build, at the same scale, at the same footprint as a GM Stellantis, knowing that you probably can't ship that to the U.S.? Like, I do feel like a bit of it is, not to, criticize anyone, because what are you going to do? Donald Trump seems, hell-bent on getting auto production back there. But I just feel like maybe Mark Carney just lay the cards out to Doug Ford. But I do feel like it's all smoke and mirrors. Like, we're not getting those auto jobs back from Korea, from China. I don't know.
Marco, I don't think it's auto jobs. Like the premier kind of alluded to it. And the one thing I think the responsibility of the premier is to tell us what's actually going on. But I think the premier alluded to it. Like, I think it's defense spending, it's industrial benefits, I think is my guess, is what's being said. Like, you may not get all those auto jobs back, but as we get $1 billion in new industrial benefits from X, is that going to go to Oshawa? Is that going to go to, you're seeing mayors, like the mayor of Barrie was up in Ottawa with his team yesterday lobbying, I've got to assume, for some of these industrial benefits to come in. I would imagine most mayors are looking at this type of thing. Like, I don't think I think you have to be a little more creative. It's not just replacing X with X. It's, can you assemble a piece of the Leopard tanks if it's what's coming in, or the Gripens, or Saab has how many other lines that they build, right? So I think that it's about the industrial benefits that could help replace those jobs, not necessarily solve the auto sector.
What do you think about that, Erin? Is that a fair kind of read?
I think that the problems in the relationship between Doug Ford and Mark Carney have had real, tangible punishments. When Doug Ford launched the Ronald Reagan ad that Mark Carney claims he didn't see and didn't know about, Donald Trump had a meltdown and made threats against Canada, and negotiations that were apparently underway stopped. And when Mark Carney went to China with Premier Scott Moe and kept Doug Ford in the dark, according to Doug Ford, it was another blow to Ontario's auto sector. So this, it's not all just fun and games. Like, if this is season 2 of Heated Rivalry, it's extremely unsexy and has to stop now because people are suffering. The auto sector, when you look at the Brampton job losses, the Alliston job losses, the even Oakville job losses, it has been blow after blow after blow after blow. And I agree with Brian that there are other types of manufacturing we could look at. If the long-term future of auto, and maybe especially EV auto, is not under the current model as viable as we need it to be, let's talk solutions. Let's talk about other types of manufacturing we could bring to Ontario. Let's talk about retooling. But currently, it seems to be auto takes a blow. Doug Ford says a line in his next press conference about it, and we move on. And that's it. Our unemployment in Ontario is up at around 7%. It's been hovering there for months now. That means that there are thousands upon thousands of people, like 800,000 job losses last year, thousands and thousands of people who are struggling to put food on the table, who don't know what comes next for them. And so when Doug Ford says, all right, I'll let you take the lead, but I'm not promising to not get in your way, I think there are a lot of Ontarians, even Ontarians who support Doug Ford, going, oh, buddy, just shut up, please.
Fair. And Brian, I mean, again, not to keep picking on our premier, but is this also like one of these politically advantageous things? Remember, he had that disastrous first year in office, and then suddenly him and Chrystia Freeland were the best buds. Is it Mark Carney and him are friends because he knows Mark Carney's popular, but if there's a slip in the polls, Doug Ford's going to be there with the shiv to do him in?
Well, I think that you've seen a different relationship at the First Minister's tables than I can remember, and maybe ever. I mean, I know Prime Minister Harper certainly didn't enjoy going to First Minister meetings. And I think it's because of the moment of time that we are in. The country is in a very precarious spot. You've got Quebec separatism on a rise. You've got Alberta separatism. You've got the threat from our largest trading partner. You've got all these things going on. So I think it is incumbent. It's not just all politics. I think it's incumbent of these leaders of different provinces to work with the federal government to help resolve some of these things and show a united front. But to Erin's point, your job is to look after your province and the needs of your province first and foremost. I think the baffling thing and as a conservative, the difficult thing to swallow was watching days after his attack on Carney over the China deal, the absolute walkback standing beside Minister Jolie like he had just been scolded. And that's there's no politics there that looks good on Premier Ford. And that's where I say if there is other opportunities that are coming out of these things, Ontarians need to know about it. Canadians need to know about it because these are good paying jobs that are going away out of the auto sector. These are important jobs to the Ontario economy. And it's important that people understand why we're giving that up. And so far, you haven't heard that. You haven't heard that from the Prime Minister. You haven't heard that from any of the premiers. This is going to be controversial, but the most clear-throated defender of their province in premier-wise has been Premier Smith. And she's had a very line in the sand, and this is what it takes to get my support. And as long as you're moving down this road that's good for Alberta, she sees it as good for Canada, she's got your support. You've got their support, right? So I think Premier Ford and his bromance with Mark Carney is got a lot of risks to it. For despite the short-term benefits, there's a lot of long-term risks.
Brian, and I feel like we've definitely heard the premiers try to use that language, talk with the we're all on the same team. But I mean, we've seen the premier feud or our premier feud with Manitoba over Crown Royal. To Brian's point, Premier Smith has been unequivocal, but she's also not necessarily been throwing out those olive branches. I feel like if we didn't get a deal with China, that was beneficial to the Western premiers, I'm not terribly confident that she would be, plotting and patting Mark Carney on the back. So I don't know. It feels like on one hand we're all got to stand united, but then the minute there's something that another premier gets over another premier, they're at each other's throats, or at least Premier Ford.
Yeah, I mean, I hear Brian's point about We haven't really heard much of an acknowledgement of the dire state of the auto sector.
Exactly.
Is looking pretty bleak for that sector. And I think the silence, I imagine, comes from maybe this understanding that maybe even at the provincial or federal level, there isn't that firepower to counter American protectionism. And maybe yes, we're going to lose lots of high paying quality jobs in key areas of the province, but I don't know that anyone can really do much about it. And that's why this auto strategy is going to be very interesting. Brian mentions that maybe defense would get involved at some point just to protect that industrial capacity. I have, I don't know, a bit of a hard time picturing that, just given the list of other industries that are queuing up for those defense dollars. I'm thinking, AI sovereignty, Arctic infrastructure expenses. And I just, if, Minister Jolie's department couldn't shore up the auto sector with those massive subsidies, I don't know that defense will. So yeah, looking pretty bleak for the auto sector in Ontario for sure.
Yeah,
I
but
agree.
sorry.
I just don't think you have a choice. We have to and there has to be a prioritization of the defense strategy, because you're right, there's only so much money to spend, but sovereignty and protecting our sovereignty has to be job one, right? It was a good day yesterday on Monday when the first round of F-35s are being delivered and accepted by Canadian Armed Forces. One of the things that I think has really not been presented by the media enough, and of course not our media, Marco, but not iPolitics, but for decades after World War II, Canada had more than one fighter jet. And I think we're going to need more than one fighter jet. So the industrial benefits that are going to come, not just from the F-35, but also something else that we're buying, the industrial benefits that are going to come from the helicopter procurement that's needed, the shipbuilding procurement that's needed. Those things, there isn't the capacity in the traditional areas where we would do those things. So I think it's incumbent upon us to protect our sovereignty first. And I think there's going to be opportunities there. And it's going to be an opportunity that the federal government gets to decide where these new centers of development are going to happen. And that's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I spoke to a procurement expert at the U.S. Embassy who, reminded us that, sure, we're having these trade disputes, but Canada-U.S. defense cooperation is not going anywhere. It's been one of those long-lasting things. So don't expect anything to change in terms of that. But I'm curious, Brian, you brought up Danielle Smith. She seems to be batting 1,000 with this new Carney government. She got her MOU. She got the China deal. To your point, it's is Doug Ford just not a good negotiator? This is his best bud, and he's seemingly not being able to kind of get him to, go out there. I understand what Ontario wants is challenging because Doug Ford put a line saying those steel jobs, those auto jobs, I want them in this country. But I don't know if you compare the two, tail of the tape, should Doug Ford maybe change his approach with Mark Carney?
I think that Premier Smith has put a very clear line in the sand. Job's not to make sure that her and Mark Carney are friends. Her job's to make sure that there's a clear communication on what it's going to take to get her acceptance. And so far, I think Prime Minister Carney has tried to make it a priority to make sure the country stays together. Separatism in Alberta is a real issue. And it is something that I don't think I've said for years isn't taken seriously enough. But if you look at the approach that Premier Smith has taken, I think it's just been clear in communication of what it's going to take to get Alberta on side with the things that they want to get Alberta on side with. I think Premier Canoe it's Premier Moe. It's not just Danielle Smith. There's been a lot of premiers that have done a fairly good job in this. Premier Ford has taken a different approach, and it's a little bit more it's just his style, right? You're either his buddy or you're not his buddy. And if you're his buddy, I'm not sure what that leads to. But
Erin, what do you think about that? Do you think that he should change up his style?
I think it's also about who is putting in the work and who is doing the homework. You really get the sense watching these announcements that Scott Moe and the Saskatchewan government did the work of communicating behind the scenes with the federal government a lot about what specifically they needed in terms of Chinese tariffs against our canola. You get the sense that Danielle Smith did her homework and was in constant contact with the Carney government to talk about the pipeline that she wanted. You get that sense from premiers across the country, including Rob Canoe. You do not get that sense from Doug Ford. You get the sense that he is making it up as he goes, that he picks up a bottle of Crown Royal on the way to his press conference because, he and his staff had this cute, clever idea that they thought would be great for TV not actually realizing that there's a whole bunch of Crown Royal jobs in Manitoba. You get the sense that Doug Ford just goes off the cuff. He's just speaking off the top of his head, coming up with ideas off the top of his head and not putting in the work. I've said it before, when he was shocked about the Canada-China agreement, he was like, I had no idea. I had no heads up. And I was like, it's not realistic. It's not reasonable to suggest that a premier has no idea what the prime minister is doing in China. Not to mention the fact that Scott Moe got on a plane and we all knew that, so we knew it was coming. But for Doug Ford to be shocked, it just tells us you're not doing your homework, bud. You're not doing the work. You can't govern by press conference. That's what's going on with Otto as well. He governs by press conference. We see him show up when auto jobs are lost to say, we're really mad about this and we're not going to stand for it. The auto industry is too important to just give up and say it's screwed. We're in trouble. We hear death rattles. He's not actually doing the work to save the auto sector, to save those jobs, which underpins really a huge chunk of Ontario's economy.
Wouldn't you say, Erin, that there's a plan needed beyond just throwing money at the problem, though, too? Like Danielle Smith has presented a market solution to what she sees as her problem. Premier Moe presented a market solution, which Prime Minister Carney seems to kind of gravitate towards. Wouldn't you say in Ontario, would you agree that there needs to be a more, at least a clearly laid out plan on what's going to happen with auto in Ontario?
100%. Yeah, let's see a real auto strategy that talks about how we could do more of the headlight to tailpipe build in Canada instead of relying on our relationship with the United States. Let's talk about what niche we can carve out where this specific type of vehicle can come from Canada, or even this specific part. Canada does it better than anywhere else in the world. So auto manufacturers in Europe and beyond have to come to us for it. I'm sure people much smarter than me on industrial strategy could come up with all kinds of places where we could carve out our auto center of excellence and preserve jobs and maybe even grow the industry. What I found really frustrating this past week, though, is when Doug Ford, trying to save face, met with Carney and Jolie and then announced a joint auto strategy. We just came up with it. There's nothing in it. Don't worry about that. There's nothing to show you. There's no paper. That I'm worried about. I want to hear solutions, and I want unions and industry at the table designing those solutions, not just Jolie and Ford in a room going, oh, we'll call it an auto strategy. That'll be great. People love that. That's, once again, not doing the homework.
I think Erin raises a really good point about the importance of finding that niche market. And I think the problem, the challenge rather, is just finding it is going to take a bit of time. And then once you do find it, it's the investment to make it happen is always going to carry some kind of risk. And who's going to want to shoulder that risk? We've seen a bit of that with the forestry sector, right? Like so many pulp and paper mills are shutting down because of the price for wood products, and the strategy there to try to keep those jobs, because these are jobs that are in Northern Ontario where entire towns are built around the mill and thousands of people and, directly and indirectly are impacted by closures. Well, the strategy there is to try to retrofit some of the infrastructure in the mill to cater to another different kind of niche market. We've seen that happen at Cap Paper, for example. Just last week got some money to do some of that work. But to get to that point, it took so much work, right? They had to do so many consultations, market feasibility studies, talk with government, talk with stakeholders. And then meanwhile, you do need money to keep the lights open and keep people employed as you're trying to transition towards other markets. So might we see something similar with the auto sector? Yes, but it's the kind of thing that's inherently going to take so much time for it to actually have any shot at being a successful move.
I guess the one thing I would say is is the auto sector a bit unique in that it's one of those heavily protected markets, maybe comparable to something like agriculture. Like everyone, like you saw when we had the EV arms race, we were basically trying to keep pace with the Americans. Like seems like everyone makes these industrial investment strategies, and these companies are also prone to leave if they got something bigger frying up later. So if it's really just like an arms race, like will it really matter to Taya's point? Like it'll take time for us to develop a niche, but like if it's just a matter of we got to spend more money and we have to use whatever tools we can, is Doug Ford kind of not really in a position to do anything, considering Donald Trump is basically said, I'm going to turn the entire U.S. tariff trade policy towards rehoming those industry jobs. I can't do anything.
Well, if it's just about spending money, Doug Ford's in the perfect.
Yeah, I was waiting for that one.
No, I think Erin and I are absolutely right, Mark, on this. And it's not just about the problem with so many politicians is this is, to Erin's point, a lot of hard work that needs to happen. This isn't just a press release and an announcement says, okay, here's $100 billion and we're going to fix this. This is like, we need to rethink some of our industrial strategy in this country and how and who we're going to serve it with. And thus the reason why, if the number one market in the world is going to be closed, you got to go start opening up the number 2 and number 3 markets in the world. We got to start looking for many other places to offset some of these things. So in that regard, that's the job of the government of Canada. We need to start putting the work in, and should have put the work in a long time ago on how to save and preserve some of these sectors or advance them to the next stage. And, that's not our job to figure out. That's their job to have that work put in.
And it's not just purely a money question. Like, it would be silly to suggest that, like provincial and federal dollars aren't a part of the equation. Obviously they are, as they are for the United States as well. But it's also a question of the talent pipeline. Do we have the engineers and the other professionals we need? Would companies be attracted here if they had that? Do we have the regulatory environment? Do we have all of these pieces that make Canada an attractive place to have your auto manufacturing operation? And money is one of the pieces, but there are many others. And if we're not taking care of all those pieces in concert and doing it with industry at the table and with unions at the table, then we're not going to win. So, maybe it is an arms race and maybe that makes it scary, but we got to win. We got to win the arms race because this is our economy we're talking about.
And to Erin's point, though, Marco, it's also like your cost of electricity, your cost of your inputs, the cost of like your regulatory burden that you put on these businesses. Like this is a lot more than just about money. And the auto sector is seemingly at a massive disadvantage because of its reliance on the United States. And the second question is like, yes, Donald Trump has started this. But is the next president of the United States really going to come in and say, actually, we don't want all these jobs that are now in Michigan? We actually going to fix that? Like, I'm not sure they are. So I think there's a real change that needs to happen here, a real dynamic. And you also can't be too impulsive and say, well, this is it for Canada-US relations, because there's a lot of sectors where the US can't do that. But, we have to not be as reliant on US trade as we were in the past, and we got to find other markets for it. Full stop.
Yeah, and I think, something Aya is reporting and following, though, it just seems like when it comes to so many different sectors, Canada has needed this like jolt that we have to like get our, everything aligned so we can actually respond to this threat. We did a story last week about, the need for an electricity strategy that they're hashing out and the fact that our demand for power is going to double. We talk about electrification, but it's also a new mine project. It seems like everything is that we need to do to counter that, threat or disruption. Seems like it's going to take a massive investment. Things we probably should have been planning for 5-10 years beforehand, or, should have done some pre-planning. It seems like obviously you couldn't predict Donald Trump, but at the same time you could have, because you already won the presidency. So yeah, I like, how far behind are we in this like arms race to kind of get these big projects online?
Yeah, I mean, Erin mentioned earlier, it's not just about the money. There's also the regulatory environment. Of course, that's huge. Brian also says, if the investment climate is more interesting south of the border, then that's where global auto manufacturers are going to want to set up shop, right? And we've seen that this race to deregulate around the world, everybody is trying to, outsell each other and trying to get investors to come in by creating this really interesting regulatory climate. I don't know that it's the right way to go. And I think it's easy to use other countries as a way to justify your policies. We here in Canada always say it shouldn't take 15 years to build a mine. And this is why the government needs to get out of the way. We need to improve permitting, blah, blah, blah. But in the US, when they announce regulatory reform, they say, look at Canada. Canada is developing mines so quickly. They can do it within, 5 to 10 years. And that's how they justify bringing it down to 2. And then, Brazil is going to do the same thing. And then at the end of it, we'll be approving mines within months, and then we won't have proper closure plans, and we won't have all of the other important things that need to be in place before you have an operation to avoid legacy waste that ultimately ends up being paid for by taxpayers. So it's hard to be like, yeah, we need to win this race, and so let's deregulate, because it's actually going to have consequences down the line. There's no way it isn't,
But to be fair, Aya, we're not deregulating. We put you tell me, you know better than I, but from what I understand, we put a major project, new bureaucracy in place to pick a few winners that we're going to fast track regulations. But as a whole, we're going to stick with a lot of the legacy policies over the last 10 years, that means nobody else is really going to move anything forward at any kind of time that industry needs, right? Like, Marco, part of the answer to your question is the last 10 years of just bad economic policy and not having the foresight to understand that AI is going to need. We've been talking about AI for a while. Anybody that understands AI knows that you're going to need massive data centers. And if you're going to need massive data centers so you can have security for the data and information, you're going to need a lot of electricity. So it's left provinces that have been more aggressive in these sectors, like Alberta, in a great spot to be the hub for these things. Alberta's going to be the hub for the data centers. You talk to any of the data guy, any of the people I'm talking to that are going to build them, it's because they have the availability of cheap electricity. But
Yeah, but hold your horses, Brian. How is that electricity generated?
Mm-hmm.
from clean coal, which we're
Clean coal?
eliminating. You look at coal around the world, the coal-fired electricity of Alberta and the regulatory environment in Alberta is far cleaner than any other place in the world that you would get that. I don't disagree that we have to have better environmental standards, and you have to have environmental standards, but you can't shut down industry. We are a country whose greatest assets are our natural resources. We have to protect them, but we also have to utilize how to sell them and who to sell them to. And, part of the problem has been we're only selling it predominantly to the neighbors to the south, right? And the other part of the problem is people don't want to invest in it now.
Yeah, aside from India, nobody wants to be opening more coal or firing more coal. So I mean, it would be a short-term strategy to look at Alberta coal as like a resource to be developed when, we could be leaders in nuclear and SMRs, for example.
Listen, I don't disagree, Erin, but other than India, China, Mongolia, and most other countries that have it and are trying to grow and develop, I'm not saying we needed to develop a whole bunch of new coal. What we're doing is shutting down the coal-fired electricity that we had in Alberta. Like, it's not about building new mines, right?
So it would be like
At
powered
the
by
same time, we need to develop, at the same time, we need to do more nuclear. We need to do more of all of the rest of the stuff, because there isn't as you grow your population, there isn't a subsiding of electricity and energy that's needed. It's only more.
To stop with the love fest here, I'll turn over to the NDP race. I think, it's fair to say this thing has kind of fallen under the radar. But one thing that we kind of see has emerged as we approach the final 2 months of the race has been a bit of an anyone but Abby movement. Erin, is that fair to say that he's kind of emerged as the front runner, and there seems to be some consternation amongst those others about the kind of, or some others who are supporting his rivals, that this is someone who might not put the NDP in a really strong place to challenge for seats in the next election?
Yeah, I don't know that I would call Avi Lewis the front runner, but he certainly has had strong fundraising numbers. No surprise, he's a person who comes from privilege. I'm sure he runs in circles that are good at fundraising. The movement that really is forming, though, is a little bit of an anyone but Avi movement, because his fundraising numbers have maybe lit a fire under some other folks. The other two front runners are Heather McPherson, who is the only sitting MP in the race. I would say she's the scuttlebutt is that perhaps she's underperforming, that she should have been kind of a shoe-in, and that has not been the case. And also Rob Ashton, who is a particularly interesting candidate because he is the Labour candidate. And so you've seen endorsements from Bea Brusk, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress, go to Rob Ashton. And you've seen sort of like the big unions line up behind Ashton, which means donations, volunteers, and votes. So I don't think that there's any formal agreement anywhere to have an anyone but Lewis movement. But I do think that Lewis's votes will be limited because it's a ranked ballot system. In a ranked ballot system, you not only have to make sure that you're number one on a lot of ballots, you are going to have to make sure you're number two on a lot of ballots to bring it home if there's no first round win. And I don't think Lewis is number two on anybody's ballot because he's so polarizing within the party. I think Rob Ashton's voters would probably rank Heather or Tennille Johnson or Tony McQuail as number two. And I think Heather's voters are most likely to put Ashton or someone else as number two, not Lewis. So it's a real test of the ranked ballot system. and should be an interesting finish to the race.
So if he doesn't win on the first ballot, long odds that he'll come in prevail at the second or third. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's really what I'm getting at here. And of course, we don't have public polling, which has been a really unique characteristic of this race. Zero public polling available. We don't know who's polling at what right now. But my suspicion, and just talking to folks within the party, my suspicion would be that if Lewis cannot win on the first ballot, then he is extremely unlikely to do well in a second or even third round.
Brian, you've been closely following this. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Honestly, I haven't been, because I find it very interesting. I think it's a very important leadership race in our country that's by and large gone, as Erin just mentioned, unpolled, not the celebrity conversation you would normally get at a leadership race, but very important. The conversation we just had, like, Erin, does it matter who wins? Will any of the three of them be well positioned to continue to fight for those causes that the NDP is so well known for in this country? And certainly, Aya makes a good point. Everybody's focused on jobs and economy now. Not to put you on the spot and dance around it if you need to, but like, who's the best to continue to perpetuate making sure the conversation around the environment, the conversation around organized labor continues to remain a topic in Parliament?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel put on the spot. I think I can answer this because the candidates themselves have talked about this. Heather McPherson has a vision for the party that is a more big tent party taking on more issues. And so she has spent her time really, really dividing her attention between foreign affairs and economics, healthcare, all of the things that sort of might make up a future NDP leader's platform. Rob Ashton is much more focused on the roots of the party. He says, we don't need to be a really big tent party that appeals to everybody. I don't want to be more centrist. I want to be the roots of this party once again, which is labor, which he himself, Ashton, is the president of the Longshore Workers Union. So he's a labor guy himself and is saying that's where we need to go. It's jobs and the economy. It's workers being treated well. It's money in your pocket. That's what this party needs to be laser focused on. His sort of catchphrase has been, workers built this country. It's time for us to run it. No surprise, Lewis is more interested in sort of the more academic issues, while he is known for his work on the environment, and controversially so, because he's not a fan of resource development. He also says that electoral reform is the issue that he would primarily work with the Liberals on. Like, in exchange for a budget vote, for example, it would be electoral reform on the table. I think that's probably not where most New Democrats are at. I'm quite sure it's not where most Canadians are at right now. We've got some bigger fish to fry, more urgent fish to fry in terms of our monthly budgets and our concerns about jobs in the economy. So that's sort of the three positions. The other two candidates are wonderful and they've comported themselves really well in the leadership race. It has been a really friendly leadership race, so much so that I noticed a fundraising email from Rob Ashton last week that was fundraising for Tennealle Johnston and Tony McQuail so that they could stay in the race and meet the final fund deadline, right? It's the most New Democrat thing you're ever going to hear. So it's been a friendly race. It's been a convivial kind of race. And I do actually hope that it heats up a little bit heading towards the convention.
It does seem, and Erin, thank you again for your comments on the story you did last month about this race. It does seem, to your point, that, obviously Rob is trying to be the working class hero, and Heather is talking about we have to address concerns that people are raising. We need to meet people where they are. I don't think she would love being called a centrist, accuse her of being that, but definitely seems to be the more, moderating voice about how to build a party. One thing about Avi that struck me is that it definitely seems to be kind of building off a lot of that momentum we saw with the Zoran Madami election in New York City. Almost, if not saying, one of the reasons we can rebuild this party is by being ambitious, by talking about some really, really bold policies. Things like publicly funded grocery stores. I don't know if we've done any polling or anyone's done any polling on that. I don't know if there's much of an audience for that, but it does seem that they're pointing to success of someone like a Madami, saying, look, people want, a even more progressive voice. Based on your read, what you saw during the last election campaign, do you think there's any kind of salience there? Or do you think that's just, obviously, what happened in New York City can't really be extrapolated for a country as vast and diverse as Canada?
Because of the vastness and diverseness, I think that the Mamdani win has actually more salience in an NDP leadership campaign than it does in a Canadian general election context. I think, though, that the policy comparisons are not quite apples to apples. What the Mamdani win does is reminds the left that the left can win, that hope should be grasped onto, that we can talk about big ideas and execute big ideas. Now, Mamdani's platform was really not wacky. It was not out there. He's not, he's not so far to the left that it doesn't resemble typical NDP policies in Canada. So I don't really think it's the big policies. I think it's the idea that hope is possible, change is possible, and we can shift things to the left, and that folks in the middle would vote for that. That folks who are, the swing voters who may also vote for Doug Ford in Ontario would vote for that kind of a hopeful vision.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing we did, we spoke to pollsters. I think David Coletto was talking about how party affiliation has become less and less important. It's more so, your read and your relationship to the big questions about stability versus disruption. Do you want things to basically, be solidified, be fortified, or do you want something to blow up the system? I just feel, and again, this is a gross oversimplification. I just feel like if you're looking from the results of April and you're thinking, oh, the problem with the NDP was they didn't run further to the left, I don't know if that's a fair assessment. I feel like it's a tough read. I think a lot of people would say maybe, a bit more, angst, bit more anger, considering the convergence of forces you saw with Donald Trump, with, the pinch from inflation, the fact that home ownership seems increasingly out of reach. Again, I don't want to be overly simplistic here, but it does seem like it's tough to say that there's a policy hook that you got to go further to the left for the NDP, but I feel like there might be some salience to say, yeah, you got to be a bit more pissed off. And maybe Jagmeet Singh wasn't the greatest voice to be that. Definitely a very likable, approachable guy. But maybe that would lean in the favor of someone like a Rob Ashton or even Avi, in the sense that we got to get people fired up and angry because, how, I hate to use this word, but how crappy things are.
Yeah, in terms of policy, you really can't get more progressive than Jagmeet Singh when you look at dental care, universal pharma care, and then running in the last campaign on price controls on essential items at the grocery store. I mean, that's just about as left as it gets. I think you're onto something there, though, with the tone. I think Canadians in the last election were governed by anger towards the United States, anger at the situation we're in right now in terms of our household budgets, the economy, the jobs market, and also fear of Donald Trump. I think even conservatives would agree that there is a real challenge with picturing Pierre Poilievre negotiating with the White House. And there was a lot of fear. I think the data told us there was a lot of fear that he would just cave, that he would give Donald Trump whatever he wants. And so I think that is really what voters had in mind when they went to the polls last time. Not the NDP's not left enough for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that supporting so closely and for so long what turned out to be one of the least popular, during the election, one of the least popular politicians in the country, had a real negative impact and made it harder for them to get their voice out. But the Conservatives, for whatever reason, decision to spend millions and millions of dollars assassinating the reputation of the NDP leader couldn't have helped. It was a silly decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, and they suffered the consequences of their own actions.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago. Conservatives talking to me thinking, well, if only the NDP was able to recover. The only reason we lost is he totally fell off the cliff. With Pierre Poilievre did not play any role in that. Like, his number one, attack dog at the end, or number one attack target from like fall 2024 onward was Jagmeet Singh. It's kind of like standing, next to, a blown up bridge with a stick of dynamite thinking, oh my God, this is awful. Again, not need to crap on conservative strategy, which seems to be popular right now. But Brian, why was there such a focus on that other than at the moment, I guess it made sense to kind of dare him into pushing for an election?
Well, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm a scientist of human nature, but I don't remember the last time picking on somebody with millions and millions of dollars of advertising made them want to vote with you on anything. I also don't know when the last time in the Canada's history, Conservatives got elected to a majority when the NDP were at record lows. I think it's hubris. I think they thought they were winning all these seats, and now we can win all of the seats if we just get these guys out of the way. I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense to me. I think Jack Layton was one of the greatest politicians this country's ever had. His popularity in Quebec certainly, and in the GTA certainly helped us in 2006, 8, and 11, but particularly 11. I am a student of Canadian politics, and I think a strong NDP helps the country, not just Conservatives, but the country, because it keeps it's one of the things that defines us from the American system. Like the NDP traditionally they're probably not seen as a threat for government, but they're kind of the moral fabric sometimes of these elections, and they keep you honest, whether you're a conservative or a liberal. I'm not disputing that dental care and some of these things were important to get done. And sometimes as a politician, you see, I want to accomplish something rather than just always oppose. I can't remember the last time also we seen in a minority government having a supply and confidence agreement benefit the smaller party, because every time something like that passes, the government takes credit for it and gets credit for it with people. And every time the government does something that's really not popular, you end up wearing it.
Yeah. I guess we can kind of leave it there, considering.
Before we wrap up, we should have a little kicker moment and talk about Prime Minister Mark Carney posing for a picture with Hudson Williams from Heated Rivalry.
What was your read on that?
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that striking a close pose with a character from a popular gay TV romance makes some kind of political statement, but it inherently does in our day and age. And we saw that with some groups in the United States taking a picture and saying, look at these Canadians are gay and weak. And this association of it's not masculine to be supportive and to cheer on this kind of content. Anyway, I thought the speech that he made at that conference was really interesting too. And just in terms of studying speech making, how much of it was spontaneous versus scripted, because he did crack some jokes that I wouldn't have expected. He has this bit where he's they went to the United States to produce this thing and the United States wanted them to tone it down. And he's like, what's the point of that? And everybody laughs, it was kind of like a comedic moment. It was well done, I thought.
Yeah, honestly, sorry, I'll let Erin have last word on this one, Marco. I thought it was great. For any, I didn't see the American commentary, but for any of them that think that Canadians are weak when it comes to hockey, we'll see here in the next couple of weeks and win Olympic gold again. But I honestly thought it was a pretty cool moment for the Prime Minister and Canadian television, to be honest with you.
Erin, what's your read?
I think it's the most beautiful way to troll the U.S. for our LGBTQ dramas to be spicy and our pucks to be hot.
Nice. What's your read, Marco?
I think it is Mark Carney just being a bit of an elusive political figure, someone who in one hand can give a speech in Davos, which lays out the challenges of dealing with a world where we are no longer dominated by one superpower and offering an alternative path. Also a leader who can effortlessly present a plan that is essentially very much baked with austerity measures into it, while at the same time being able to captivate a very much socially media audience with one kind of cheesy, cutesy little photo. It's almost, like this guy is somehow a generational politician the same way Trudeau was, but with less effort. So I don't know. I feel like it's tough to every time something like this happens, it seems like there's another gear that makes him just that much more difficult to challenge on any range, whether it's on the left or the right. And I don't think it's a deliberate thing. I don't think he was like, oh, I'm going to really do this pose and I think he was Mark Carney. And I think it comes from a level of confidence and intelligence to know that, he has a lot of trust and confidence in himself, and he doesn't really necessarily pay too much attention. He obviously he's a politician, so I don't think everything he does isn't a bit calculated, but I think he has a lot of confidence that what he thinks and does will pay off in the end. Sorry, Brian, I know that's not what you want to hear.
I don't know, Marco. I thought it was good. No, honestly, he's a different politician. I always knew you loved Harper policies. You just wanted a different outfit on him. That's all.
I mean, I think that's why we try to say that he knows how to market it better than, admittedly, a lot of different other politicians would. And I think it makes it really tough for Pierre Poilievre to, on one hand, criticize this guy while he's out there making an MOU, but at the same time, I think Canadians do like the fact that he seems to be this anti-Trump. So even though he's overseeing a government that's massively cutting public service jobs, I think it's tough even to make that argument from the left because of what he stands in contrast to. But yeah,
maybe a little easier to pull that off in the honeymoon phase. He's still in. Like, we'll talk about this in 6 months.
I'm not sure he's massively cut the public service either, but I'm with Erin. I'm still waiting for a lot of things to happen. Like, apparently provincial trade barriers are gone and we're just going to make all this money back by trading with each other. And we don't need the US. Like, some of these things they just don't make sense, Marco, when you've been around as long as some of us have been.
just had to go back to Doug Ford, Brian.
You know what's going to be interesting? I don't know if we're done yet or not, but you know what's going to be interesting is going to be how many floor crossers there are. That's going to be the topic of the next couple of weeks. Who and how many, and the Carney Liberals got to make a decision whether, if there is 5 of them out there, do they want 5? That kind of sticks them with a majority government for a while.
Yeah, I think they're deciding right now between taking 1 or 2 more floor crossers or taking a federal election.
Is that the thing you're going to be looking forward to next week, Erin, or is there anything else that'll be top of mind?
That's really top of mind for me right now. But also, I mean, with Parliament back in session, I think there's been a lot of talk about, does Parliament really matter? Right now, it's foreign affairs. We're more interested in Carney v. Washington and Carney v. China. And you know what? We're in a minority parliament. The role of Parliament in signing off on these deals really does actually matter. So I'm watching carefully to see what the NDP continues to push for, and certainly who's willing to cross the floor.
How about you, Aya? What are you looking for?
What am I looking for? I'm really excited to see what will come out of the announcements out of the US on Wednesday for the mining strategy and what it might entail for Canadian mining operations, especially when it comes to floor pricing. I know lots of projects really depend on having that baseline price to go ahead, and the US is apparently going to propose some tools and mechanisms to get there. And they have, in the past supported key Canadian mining operations in key stages of development. I don't know if that's still the case given the geopolitical context, but it's something to pay attention to either way.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading Economic Insights from IAD, as I always am. But also, I noted a change in tone in Parliament, right? Like, we seen unanimous consent when it came to the legislation this week on reducing grocery prices, at least for the short term. To me, are we going to see all the opposition parties have a bit of a change in tone so that they can draft off some of the popularity of what's actually going on and getting in tune with what Canadians are actually looking for, which isn't constant election speculation while we're in the current situation?
For me, I wrote yesterday about how the Conservatives are offering an olive branch on the GST rebate, but they're continuing to dig in their heels on some of the criminal justice bills. I don't know who the Liberal partnership is on those pieces of legislation. On one hand, they seem to be reaching out to those conservative or center-right voters. At the same time, the Conservatives are saying that you're simply not going far enough. And I doubt there'd be much of an audience in the NDP. So I'm very curious to see what the Bloc Québécois does in this circumstance. This might be the best opportunity for them before more floor crossers make their moves. They may have maximum leverage, considering you need either the Conservatives or the Bloc to play nice with you at committee to get things passed. So I do wonder, they got their religious beliefs exemption removal as part of C9. Do they go for something else? Is there anything in those criminal justice bills that they can kind of trade off for? Very curious to see how they kind of manage their unique power here, or if the Liberals play everyone lip service and then in a couple of weeks we have our floor crossers and we're no longer having this conversation. But I think those criminal justice bills are going to be really interesting to test the level of cooperation, because I don't think anything in there is going to win over the NDP, and I don't think it goes far enough for the Conservatives. So how do you get those things passed?
Well, and to that point, Marco, if there's enough floor crossings, as Erin's talking about, you're going to need a prorogation, right? Because you have to reset the committee ratios and everything else. Or you could have 5 floor crossers, have a majority, but still not have a majority in committee for the spring session. So there'll need to be a prorogation. How long is a prorogation? All these types of things start coming into play if that happens.
It's true. Could disrupt a lot of things legislatively if they don't move quickly right now. So, but yeah, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Erin and Aya, for joining us. And Brian, thank you as always for being the co-pilot here. I'm Marco Vigliotti, and for all of us here at iPolitics, thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Marco.